Language and some scenes you may find upsetting as we recap it all with Charlie.
Hello, I'm Charlie Brooker and you're watching 2011 Wipe, a programme all about possibly the least eventful year in human history. A year in which so little happened it's frankly rather embarrassing having to sit here desperately trying to drum up interest. It was a year in which Kim Jong-il died, too late to be featured in this show. Jeremy Clarkson made an entirely serious call for cold-blooded murder.
Frankly, I'd have them all shot.
And that wasn't the only TV controversy.
And the winner is The Only Way is Essex.
History was made as the glamorous BAFTAs tailspan into absurdity when The Only Way is Essex won an audience award, helpfully defining the precise moment humankind lost any right to claim it was more sophisticated than Lichin. Towie, as people insist on calling it, is a sort of reality soap about a town full of white, clean vinyl sex dolls, and is the first BAFTA-winning show to feature a sequence in which its cast attempt to light their own farts.
We can't get close.
It's been such a hit, it's been joined on screen by similar fodder, such as E4's terrifying Made in Chelsea. Not so much a programme, more a glossy commercial for depersonalisation disorder. I watched Made in Chelsea online and it was interrupted by one of those bizarre adverts starring the doll Mio puppets. And I realised that the doll Mio puppets world was actually more realistic than Made in Chelsea. Anyway, the year started well for Britain with the triumph of grandiose, nostalgic tongue-twist-em-up The King's Speech, which starred smouldering Colin Firth as Mr George King, a sovereign whose mouth wouldn't do what it was told, and Helena Bonham Carter as the Empire's first quilf. The bulk of the film is a sort of Rocky for stammerers, as George King overcomes several hurdles and gradually learns to smile and speak like a human being instead of an excruciatingly buffering podcast. It all builds towards a glorious finale in which Timothy Spall, playing Baron Greenback, the royals and a shitload of meaningless plebs gather to hear Mr George King deliver a very important speech during which he absolutely can't drop below 60 words per minute or the bomb on the bus will explode. Something like that anyway. I nodded off for a bit in the middle section, to be honest. Thing is, since that speech is the one he gave announcing the advent of World War II, it's a bit like a feel-good movie about a doctor who overcomes his fear of X-rays in order to diagnose your death. Come on, King, tell them about the advent of World War II. Come on, announce their doom. You can do it. Come on, you can do it.
With God's help, we shall prevail.
Yes, he did it! Yes, he announced the advent of World War II, during which 450,000 Britons lost their lives and millions were butchered worldwide. Hooray! Hooray for George King! Yay! Anyway, in summary, good film, you know, bit dorky. Meanwhile, in foreign lands, Tunisia was getting a bit fighty. Way back in 2010, the average Briton only knew two things about Tunisia. One, it was where they filmed Star Wars, and two, that was all we knew about Tunisia. As you could see from the footage, Tunisia seemed like a great holiday destination. I mean, look at it, it's got a lovely beach, idyllic sunset, massive bloody fire. Yes, Tunisia's sunspot status had quickly changed when thousands took to the streets in protest after a desperate young vegetable seller set himself on fire, an act of tomatodom that sent shockwaves across the Arab world. Soon, Tunisian President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, whose name sounds a bit like a can of springs bouncing down a staircase, was toppled and became merely the first in a cut-out-and-keep series of badly dyed despots who got the heave-ho this year. The Arab Spring posed a bit of a quandary for the news. For years, we'd grown accustomed to the news showing us footage of furious Arabs in the street chanting death to the West. But now, the furious Arabs were the good guys. And prior to this year, there seemed to have been very little reporting of who the Arab leaders were. Now, suddenly, they were everywhere, being hit in the face with shoes. Sometimes one shoe, sometimes more, sometimes a whole bloody shoe factory, as in this alarming Sky News moment. Before long, the despot-toppling craze was sweeping through the Arab world like the norovirus on a cruise ship. And next up was Egypt, which was run by this man, Hosni Mubarak, played here by the Count from Sesame Street. Mubarak was generally acknowledged by the West to be a bit of a tyrant, whose zany resistance-crushing affectations were tolerated because he brought stability to the region. And as February arrived, we could see just how stable he was making things. In a normal year, a revolution in Egypt would be the biggest story, but 2011 wasn't a normal year, more like an end-of-season finale for all of mankind. And as Mubarak left the stage, Libyan leader Colonel Gaddafi began feeling the heat. To millions, Gaddafi was a hilarious cartoon character from the 80s, like Alf or Garfield, only slightly less plausible. The West regarded him as a bad guy on account of his links to very bad events. Then, like many 80s icons, a few decades later, Gaddafi reinvented himself for a new audience, with an ironic nice guy act which earned him this passionate roadside snog from Tony Blair. But millions of Libyans didn't find him quite so sexy, and suddenly emboldened by what had happened in Tunisia and Egypt, they too rose up.
Cue a brutal crackdown which led to these tragic scenes.
When rumours spread that Gaddafi had fled to Venezuela, he appeared on TV to deny it in a surreal Vic and Bob style sketch, expertly captured for posterity by Sky News.
Rest assured. Oh, it's raining. I was going to talk with the youth in Green Square and spend the night with them tonight, but it's raining, and that's a good omen. So I just want to show them that I am in Tripoli and not in Venezuela. Don't believe the broadcasts of those stray dogs. Bye.
Yeah, bye, you mad prick.
Gaddafi's charm offensive continued with a relaxing dinner date with a group of journalists, including the BBC's Jeremy Bowen.
Now, if I had to interview a possibly insane, murderous despot, I think I'd be a tad nervous, but Jeremy's such a pro, he can launch straight into the small talk.
This is a very nice spot here. This restaurant is excellent.
Oh, this date's going well. Wonder if they'll get to third base. But once the small talk was over, Bowen opened with a hard question, which Gaddafi answered expertly and cogently.
Mr. Gaddafi, thanks very much for seeing us. It's nearly 7 o'clock in the evening here in Tripoli, and you're in your capital city, but there are large areas of this country which you don't control anymore. There are even people in towns quite near here who are part of this rising, this rebellion. What are you going to do about all of that?
Well, what is the question?
Another megalomaniac who was making waves was Charlie Sheen, who in the war on drugs was pretty much the official spokesman for drugs. Having gone through a public drug-fueled meltdown, Sheen confounded the US media by refusing to respond in the expected contrite and apologetic manner in a series of disapproving interviews conducted by a reporter with a stick up her arse.
When you look back at the last time you used drugs, are you disgusted with yourself, or do you think, how could I have done that?
I'm proud of what I've created. It was radical.
You're proud of that party moment?
Of course. Why wouldn't I be? No,
Why would you be?
Hit him! Hit him till he says he hates drugs!
All these radio rants have people thinking Charlie Sheen has got to be on drugs again.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I am on a drug. It's called Charlie Sheen.
Charlie Sheen there, describing a drug called Charlie Sheen. I don't know how you take Charlie Sheen, although I suspect vaginally, or anally, or orally, probably in that order. March is rarely the prettiest of months, and this one was uglier than usual. In Japan, news cameras caught footage of a natural disaster of such ghastly magnitude it was hard for the human mind to comprehend. This was quickly followed by a crisis at the Fukushima nuclear plant. This was terrifying for several reasons, not least because the news now had to try and explain how a nuclear reactor worked. So hysterical Fox News Pollyanna Glenn Beck proved his expertise by simulating nuclear fusion with tubes of M&Ms and some saucepans.
The core is in this facility. Containment facility. I'm going to have to take these M&Ms out. Darn it.
Oh, well done, Butterfingers. You've killed millions.
My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding was great, right? Basically, it was like one of those Attenborough things, but with gypsies instead of polar bears.
Come to me, woman.
He let you look at a group of people you never get to see and judge them, but also laugh at them. So it had two things going on, judging and laughing. It looked like Star Trek, basically, but with sort of Irish people, like Irish Star Trek. It gave you, like, a deep cultural insight into what, like, thighs and arses look like, but one's from a forbidden world, you know? And they had all these garish outfits you could look down on and these dodgy cultural practices that were fun to condemn.
It's not long before the grabbing begins.
People said it was racist, but it wasn't, because none of them were black. And even if they had been, it wouldn't have been racist because you weren't laughing at their skin, but everything else about them.
In London, a mass demonstration opposing government cuts began peacefully with a speech from Ed Miliband.
This government will say, this is a march of the minority. They are so wrong.
But barnstorming Ed was soon overshadowed, at least in terms of news coverage, when trouble reared its head.
Soon, the so-called black bloc of anarchists dressed head to toe in a sort of face-obscuring leisure-wear burqa were attacking anything shop-shaped.
They even kicked a bank in the bollocks, during which a Sky News cameraman got a bit carried away and seemed to join in with the trespassing fun, to be rewarded with exciting footage of an anarchist fearlessly breaking in and attacking some leaflets. Peaceful Action Group UK Uncut carried out a genteel protest in Fortnum and Masons, only to find themselves quickly kettled in by cops in scenes which closely resembled the game Tetris. There was a lot of anger around the cuts, anger that was also reflected in the House of Commons.
There were tense exchanges between Lord David Camerabum and Edwardian Miliband, but we can't show them here. Thanks to the law, we're not allowed to use footage from inside the House of Commons or the Select Committee or the Leveson Inquiry. We can't show you Prime Minister's questions or Murdoch getting hit with a pie or Hugh Grant, none of that. But that's because we're classed as an entertainment show, unlike This Week, which can use the footage because it's a proper current affairs show. Look, proper current affairs. Fortunately, however, we can bring you a theatrical reconstruction. So we have. Yes, for the purposes of this show, several stars from Made in Chelsea have sportingly staged a dramatic performance of parliamentary proceedings in the Hen and Chickens Theatre, Islington. For instance, here Chelsea's Ollie Locke relives the controversial moment David Cameron said, "Calm down, dear."
He's no longer an MP because he lost the election. Of the Conservative candidate, I'm afraid he is now a GP. Calm down, dear. Listen to the doctor.
See? Brilliant. Take that, the law.
Wildlife, and viewers of Britain's premier controversy hothouse The One Show tuned in to see a peculiar round-faced creature staring at an owl. Well, I think he's going to eat it. Yes, Prime Mini-bot David Replicant was there sitting patiently as a man tried to sell him a bird of prey.
This is the complete predator. Yeah. If you look at the feathers, they're just totally soft and abraded along the edge, which means she flies completely silently. The prey never hears her coming.
I've heard an owl coming. It went to-whip, to-woo.
4 mice a day. I mean, this could be competition.
Why, how many mice do you eat? 5?
Having failed to buy or eat the owl and having watched footage of it eating a mouse without licking his lips and howling, the PMatron had passed another humanity test and was now free to leave.
But not before cuddly Matt Baker kerplunked him with an awkward question.
Just very quickly, how on earth do you sleep at night?
Cameron must have thought, who the hell does this country file presenter think he is?
April, and what could be better to take the nation's mind off the background stench of doom than a feel-good royal wedding? The BBC rolled out a glossy advert proving it would be watched by both stars and plebs. They milked the build-up for all it was worth, conducting a series of hard-hitting interviews with royal experts to see what they made of it all.
Experts like this.
Young Matilda here. Hello, are you excited about this?
Yes, I am.
Yes?
Yes.
And do you think Kate will be a nice princess?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
And she's very pretty, isn't she?
Yes, she is.
Yes. Well, well done you. Have a lovely day.
Come the day itself, there was wall-to-wall coverage as Kate got out of a hotel into a car which drove down a road and then stopped, and then she got out of the car revealing her dress, which made some crowd members almost spew with joy. Personally, I was glued to my screen throughout the day, not because of the wedding, but because I was playing Portal 2, one of the best video games ever. I mean, why waste my afternoon watching Ben Fogle get married when I could be clambering through teleportation holes I've just shot in the wall? Meanwhile, everyone else seemed to be watching a global Rear of the Year contest as Kate's sister Pippa stole the show by owning buttocks. You'd have thought she stuck her bum in the font given the amount of coverage it got.
And the US networks were even more butt-happy with breathless report after breathless report. There were even sinister features in which viewers were told how to get a booty like Pippa's using surgery.
You asked women, would you like a sexier, curvaceous buttock? That'd almost be an overwhelming yes.
One American who wasn't massively impressed with the royal wedding was comedian and shambles Doug Stanhope, who joins us now for some whining in an accent.
I'm Doug Stanhope, and that's why I drink. Evidently, there was a big royal wedding that happened over here. I didn't hear about it personally because I was in the Antarctic somewhere with my head in a bucket of tar like a David Blaine trick for 6 months, so I didn't have to hear about it. Because it irks me that I spent 8 years coming over here under the George Bush regime with my head hung in shame, saying it's not my fault, it's not my fault. And the whole time not realizing you guys still have royalty? How embarrassing is that? You have queens and dukes and princesses. Do you have wizards and fairies and dragons? For God's sake, is this a country or a Renaissance festival? What kind of Dungeons and Dragons bullshit is that? I'm apologizing for George. How dare you ever make fun of any democratically elected official when you still have this Dark Ages nonsense going on?
There was this thing called super injunctions, right? Which meant you weren't allowed to say things which everybody knew about, say, Ryan Giggs, except you were allowed to type about them as long as you did it on the internet, because the police can't find you on the internet because it doesn't have a postcode. Andrew Marr, right, he had a super injunction. I felt sorry for him because every week in that nice film at the start of his show, he had to drive to work in that little toy car they give him to make him look stupid and get the papers himself and go into the office knowing all the staff were talking about his super injunction thing and stand in the lift with his ears burning, which would have knacked. That's the price you pay for going on telly. Once someone's on telly, you have the right to know who they're sleeping with or what they get up to in bed or what's on their phone or what their secret fears are, or what hand they wipe their arse with, or what it would look like if you kicked them over and pulled their pants down and stared right up their arsehole, because it's in the public interest.
If you're wondering what an anonymous tabloid hack might make of the super injunctions saga, you're in luck, because here's anonymous tabloid hack Fleet Street Fox with her personal view.
It was very frustrating as a journalist to know that everyone on Twitter was talking about the things that we weren't allowed to report. I thought that quite a few of them probably were in the public interest, but there's no way I could have mentioned it to anybody. I'd have lost my job, I could have lost my home. Whereas the average man in the street can happily repeat the gossip he's heard in the pub. 75,000 odd people, I think it was, broke Giggs' injunction on Twitter, and not one of them had any court action taken against them. The media couldn't cover it, that was the problem. That's why it was a farce. We couldn't even report the fact that people were breaching an injunction. It was a ridiculous situation. All the injunctions have been brought under Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, which says that everybody has a right to respect for privacy and a family life. It doesn't say that you have a right to a secret life, and the two are very, very different. Marriage is a public thing and a public record, and if, say, you're making money out of your marriage or out of being in a happy relationship or misleading the public in some way, perhaps you ought to be honest about the fact that it's not always working. If you don't respect your privacy and your family life, for example, by repeatedly sleeping with hookers, then I'm not going to respect you either.
Hooray! It's May, and after battling to victory in a thrilling edition of WWE Extreme Rules Wrestling, beefy John Cena makes a shock announcement.
We have caught and compromised to a permanent end Osama bin Laden.
Once the crowd had slowly unlocked the meaning of those words, an inspiring scene transpired as Hunky John prowled the cheering arena, everyone bathed in the reflected glory of a criminal thousands of miles away being shot in the head by soldiers they didn't know, in a manner that is in no way disturbing or homoerotic. Anyway, let's not judge. That may look like an outpouring of joy, but it's actually just relief. Fox News anchor Geraldo Rivera was so relieved when he heard the news, he livened up his broadcast by spontaneously spouting lyrics.
Bin Laden is dead. Bin Laden is dead.
Shot once in the chest and then in the head.
Multiple sources. Osama bin Laden is dead. Happy days.
Yay!
This is the greatest night of my career. The bum is dead.
And they shot 4 other people too. One of them was a woman. Hooray!
And I am so blessed, I'm so privileged to be at this desk at this moment.
Yay! Have a pint of blood on me. Cheers! Still, it's just relief he's expressing, not joy. Jubilant scenes then spread across all the news networks as crowds gathered in a not at all ghoulish way to celebrate the shooting to death of the bearded murderer. See, more relief, not joy.
Within months, Osama's takedown had been turned into a thrilling docudrama full of talking head interviews with the people responsible.
It's nice to know that in battling a monster, the Americans didn't become monsters themselves, which is so often the case. A monster would revel in death, but they were simply expressing relief, not joy.
One image that comes out of this is the fact that bin Laden's final sight on this earth was the muzzle of a U.S. Navy SEAL. For those of us who've been looking for bin Laden for a long time, to know that that was the last thing that he saw is actually a moment of joy.
Ed Miliband, he's brilliant, right? He's like a boy who's won a competition to lead a party, but he always looks a bit worried, like he thinks someone's going to throw his satchel on the roof. But then, in June, right, Ed Miliband broke. He was being interviewed on the news about strikes, and he's standing there with his eyes, right? And they ask him what he thinks about the strikes, and he says,
"These strikes are wrong at a time when negotiations are still going on."
And then they ask him another question, and he says,
"At a time when negotiations are still going on, I do believe these strikes are wrong."
And then he says it again, right?
What I say is that the strikes are wrong when negotiations are still going on.
And then he keeps saying it.
These strikes are wrong because negotiations are still going on.
And you're thinking, I'm going mental, stop him saying it. But he won't stop saying it. It's like you're stuck in a box with him saying...
And it's wrong at a time when negotiations are still going on.
And then, after a while, they give up. And then someone must have reset his Wi-Fi because he was all right the next day. So then he was back to walking around looking sexy. Because he is really sexy. He's a powerhouse. But he goes at it like a jackhammer.
Throughout the year, we were kept entertained by thousands of brilliant TV commercials, none of which we'll look at now. We start with a terrifying horror film set in a world in which the human brain no longer exists.
Oh, so smooth. Love and soft.
Is it just me, or is this the sort of thing the losing team make in The Apprentice during advert week? You know, the one crumb of comfort it's possible to draw from this commercial is the certain knowledge that everyone involved in making it, or merely watching it, will one day die.
Bag full of fun.
Teeth! And in a sinister development for dental care, a bastard bothers shoppers with a probe.
Excuse me, is your toothpaste working?
Yeah, of course.
Time for a quick check. Have a look.
Bacteria. But I brushed this morning.
Don't lie, you bitch. The probe knows everything you've done.
Weirdly, the next day, she obeyed the regime's orders.
See.
Wow, where's all that bacteria? I'm impressed.
Good, now pull your pants down for stage 2 of the inspection.
Coffee! And these absurd ads try to seduce women by shoving
fantasy men before them, like man carrots.
How'd you like your coffee? How about smooth, sensual, and with these?
Not really. Mauve doesn't do anything for my legs.
And you know what? I've been thinking. I'm going to move my stuff out of the bedroom so there's more room for your enormous handbags.
Don't talk about my testicles like that.
How do you like your coffee?
Black?
How about smooth, aromatic, and with a long conversation?
No, just black.
How do you like your coffee?
Tossed in your f***ing face?
How about smooth, aromatic, and in Paris?
No, I prefer it in mugs. As July arrived, the phone hacking saga suddenly became a horror story.
Throughout the year, the story had been gaining momentum. Trouble is, no one really cared if the tabloids were hacking the phones of celebrities.
They're not even real people. They're probably a form of animated pate.
Even if they'd got stories by waterboarding soap stars, no one would mind.
Are you pregnant? Yes or no? Are you pregnant? Are you up the duff? Yeah. Have you got a bun in the oven? Yeah.
But then on July the 4th, the story broke, which changed everything.
More revelations in the news of the world hacking scandal. It's accused of intercepting Millie Dowler's phone.
Never again could the paper be seen as a cheerfully vile bit of crinkly bog roll that was cruel to celebs. Now it was cruel to real people.
The incredible thing is, the story got worse.
The shocking, grim headlines kept coming.
It was as if the paper was locked in a deadly game of one-downsmanship with itself. It was actually quicker to list victims of tragedy who weren't involved. I'm surprised the cast of the Poseidon Adventure weren't on the list.
Later in the year, The Guardian admitted the screws probably hadn't deleted Millie's voicemails, whoopsie-daisy, but they had accessed them, and it's fair to say people weren't impressed. Being a tabloid reporter has never been seen as the most noble of professions, of course, but suddenly it was a career on a par with necrophiliac porn wrangler, and it didn't help that virtually the only person stepping up to defend the Red Tops was former screws hack and walking ethical vacuum in a shabby jacket, Paul McMullen.
I've always said that I've just tried to write articles in a truthful way, and, you know, what better source of getting the truth is to listen to someone's messages. Now, that might sound frivolous, but
it's also immoral?
I have to say, I think you're a walking PR disaster for the tabloids, because you don't come across in a sympathetic way. You come across as a sort of risible individual.
God, that is amazing of Steve Coogan. To be able to play both Alan Partridge and Paul McMullen in the same room at the same time.
Because we'll no longer be able to expose silly celebrities for taking coke and cheating on their wives, which, to be honest, I always found a bit of fun. You know,
everyone had a go at him. Liverpudlians.
You have to ask me who I was before. So you start saying, oh, I was exposing Cook. He didn't even know who I was or what I'd done.
Former colleagues.
And those people who've been thrown out of work because of things like you and previous people like you have done, and besmirched the name of a good paper.
Hugh Grant.
Your only motive was profit.
You're not journalists, you have no interest in journalism. It's just money, money, money. Hey, you should try real journalism, because you're not an idiot, Paul. You could probably do it.
He had to eat more shit than David Walliams swimming up the Thames.
It was a profoundly depressing sight. You could watch him getting shabbier and shabbier as time wore on, limping from studio to studio like he was just trying to keep warm till viewers began texting in, desperately trying to vote him off.
Although I moved up, so my phone's beeping, so I'll turn that off.
Oh, he's still there. I mean, I'd leave him a voicemail, but I don't know if he'd listen to it. Of course, it's all very well sniggering at cartoon tabloid hacks, but what about the editors who employed them?
Imagine being a tabloid editor. Must be like working down a shit mine. Imagine going to work every day knowing you're actively making the world worse. Oh, what did you do today, darling? Oh, not much. I ran a story about a Muslim council banning the word chalk because it sounds a bit like pork. Oh, really? Oh, is that true? Nah. Attention quickly focused on the News of the World editors who either did or didn't know what was going on there. Andy Coulson had already claimed total ignorance and resigned twice. Now pressure was mounting on former Wonder Stuff frontman and News International CEO Rebecca Brooks, who'd been instrumental in keeping the News of the Screws going, spending years standing in the newsroom expertly stopping the monitors wobbling. Meanwhile, an unimpressed public was online organising boycotts, trying to bring down the empire with their keyboards.
And at the end of the week, the Death Star exploded.
Cue excitable headlines from around the globe.
Sunday's issue of the News of the World will be the last edition of the paper.
This is massive news. I don't think anyone in their wildest dreams could have predicted that it would end like this.
We do know tonight that after 168 years, the world is ending.
I went and bought the final News of the World. It was an odd atmosphere in the newsagents. No one would look anyone else in the eye. It was a bit like we'd stumbled across the corpse of a bear in the woods and we were silently queuing up to have sex with it. You know how that feels. The thing itself is a curious artefact. It had a strangely muted final front page, as you can see here, thank you and goodbye. Normally when a despised monster is killed, it just lets out a howl like, oh, that should have been really what was on the front page. And the thing itself is the strangest edition of the News of the World ever. First of all, they've got this final editorial saying goodbye. That must have been a tricky thing to write because they had to concentrate on the paper's good points. It must have been a bit like writing the eulogy at Fred West's funeral. I mean, what are you going to say? He was good with his hands, he was virile. There was the usual sort of mix of, you know, here's the good things we did. Look, here's a bum we showed you. And these little farewell messages from readers scattered around like little tragic croutons. Britain will never be the same again, says Les from Manchester. Yes, it will. And then in the middle, they've got this special souvenir pullout. Souvenir pullout of all their greatest front pages. Where is it? Yeah, Kerry Katona doing coke. Proud of that. Look, someone hid a camera in Kerry Katona's bathroom. I don't know, if I hid a camera in a woman's bathroom, I'd expect to go to prison. Luckily, I hide them so well, no one's going to find them. Jacko's deathbed. Now that's tasteful, isn't it? This is the sensational first picture of the bed where Michael Jackson took his last breath. That's nice, isn't it? And you look at this, you look at all of this, all these sort of gaudy front pages, and you just go, yeah, I'm glad it died.
But if News International hoped deleting the Screws from history would help stem the crisis, they were wrong. Before long, Brooks had to resign, seen here leaving the building disguised as an unhappy Charles II. But attention wasn't just on Brooks, but also her boss, ultra-powerful media tycoon Rupert Murdoch, seen here in the least convincing Match.com poster campaign ever. For years, it was as though Rupert Murdoch represented God, and all our public figures were medieval villagers terrified of speaking ill of him. You must never anger God, for God can hear everything you say, especially if you say it in a voicemail. God has the power to destroy you, for he controls the sun, and soon he will control the entire sky, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And then suddenly, in the wake of the phone hacking revelations, it was as though a jamming signal had been switched off, and suddenly everyone could talk openly about him for the first time ever. This media oligarch was losing his touch, and soon he had to appear before the Select Committee alongside his mechanical sidekick, Jamesbot 2.0. In accordance with regulations made in Chelsea's, Oliver Proudlock will be playing Rupert Murdoch, while Jamie Lang dons the mantle of his robot offspring, James. Louise Mensch, however, is performed by Cheska Hull. The Select Committee was like a Bush Tucker trial for Murdoch. The ordeal began with him swallowing his own dignity.
Before you get to that, I would just like to say one sentence. This is the most humble day of my life.
And for seconds, a slice of unexpected foam pie.
The settlement did not.
Oh, no! So what exactly is a Rupert Murdoch? Here's a short film from documentary maker Adam Curtis explaining what he thinks.
This is the story of how Rupert Murdoch took over the old newspapers of Fleet Street and used them to wage a cultural revolution against the snobbish elites that dominated Britain. But there was a weird logic to Murdoch's revolution that would lead him to intrude ever more deeply into people's private lives and would eventually bring his empire to the brink of destruction.
And it talks on the phone. The world's top talking power.
Murdoch's populist revolution failed to change Britain's power structure. Yet his failure would open the way for the rise of a new elite who are far more invasive into all our private lives than Murdoch's papers ever were.
Well, we'll send one of our best parrot photographers, Patty. How's that?
Rupert Murdoch shocked the British establishment right from the start. In 1969, he bought the News of the World and immediately published the diaries of the model and call girl Christine Keeler. They unearthed an old sex scandal about a Conservative politician called John Perfumer, and the British establishment was scandalised.
Christine Keeler, the girl who sparked off a drama of government scandals, spying, intrigue, and even death. On Sunday, Christine opens her secret diary and tells the first full story in the News of the World.
I was young and naive then, but now I've had time to think. This is the first time the public will be able to read the real truth.
Do you have any qualms about that, as muckraking and going over an old scandal that should be dead and buried by now?
No, certainly not. And it shouldn't be dead and buried either.
The vicious reaction of the British upper classes shocked Murdoch, and in the 1970s he fled with his young family to the United States. And he used the money pouring in from his British newspapers to start building an American empire. And his personal myth began to take shape, that he was a revolutionary outsider challenging the decadent British system. In 1976, he said in an interview, "In Britain, it's very easy to get sucked into the establishment. I think when people start taking knighthoods and peerages, it's really telling the world that you have sold out. I just wasn't prepared to join the system." And in 1981, Murdoch came back and took his revenge. He bought the Times and made it clear that he was now challenging the hypocritical elites wherever they were in Britain or America.
They hate to see someone communicating with the masses. They feel that newspapers, the written word is not for the masses. That should be left to television, or perhaps to nobody. But there's a great sort of elitism. It was a typical piece of slanting and elitism by the BBC.
Well, I don't know what you mean by down market and up market. That is so English, class-ridden snobbery when you talk like that.
Over the next 30 years, Murdoch's newspapers promoted a populist idea of democracy. This challenged the idea that anyone could set themselves up in Britain as a superior elite and tell people what was best for them. But there was a ferocious logic to this idea of democracy. Because if everyone was equal, then no one was special. And that had big implications for the celebrities who had become central to Murdoch's newspapers. If they were more famous than the rest of us, it meant they were different from us. And the Murdoch vision didn't like the idea of anyone being different. So celebrities had to be transformed, so they would become more like us. Flawed and unhappy, drinking too much and eating too little, struggling with emotional problems and with cellulite. But most celebrities didn't want to be seen like that. So Murdoch's journalists had to resort to increasingly devious methods to give us the information we craved, the private failings and weaknesses of the famous. Today, Murdoch may be on the way out, but we all still distrust elites. And there is a new empire that offers the same dream of a world without hierarchies where we are in control. It is Google, with its promise of information flowing free of all political control, and where everyone talks to each other as equals. But the price we pay for this is that Google's machines watch us all the time and know everything about us. And they don't even have to pay for private detectives or for phone taps. And the strange thing is, we don't seem to be bothered about this at all.
Food! And the spiritual world's answer to Lady Gaga drops in to illuminate the otherwise earthly Australian master chef.
I'm standing at my bench mincing some garlic.
Okay, so we're going to meet the 7 contestants.
When I look up and His Holiness, the Dalai Lama himself, has come into our kitchen to meet us.
Serenity doesn't get tougher than this.
His sort of Christliness was on hand to spread mystical vibes throughout the kitchen and to ask and answer the big questions.
What is this? Cheese. This is cheese. Yes, you like cheese, don't you?
Yes. But there was more to the great Yoda Almighty's trip than mere cheese liking. Yes, he was here to judge, for which he took his seat for the Last Supper. And lo, when the nervous contestants shuffled in with their offerings, lobbing plate after plate in front of his superness, one woman was afeared, for her creation was not up to par.
Your Holiness, today I had a bit of a disaster in the kitchen. It's not what I wanted on the plate.
Go from this place!
I wanted to share it with you today, but I didn't get on the plate. I'm sorry.
Well done. Good on.
Oh, she's in there.
Hand rubbing aside, MasterChef wouldn't be MasterChef without a tense judging scene, and Dalai Lama or not, this was to be no exception.
Well, she's obviously, during her plating up period, got some gnocchi up, but mine's actually quite raw and doughy.
I think they tried their best.
Yeah, you haven't really got the hang of this judging thing, have you? August is traditionally a quiet month in terms of events, but 2011 had other plans. Following the shooting of Mark Duggan by police, feelings were running high in Tottenham, North London. And when a Saturday afternoon protest demonstration turned violent, TV quickly filled with disturbing scenes of wanton destruction and furious crowds. You know, just like it does at the start of a zombie film.
At other times, it resembled one of the thrilling bonus stages from Street Fighter 2. Nothing was safe, and that included the camera crews.
There are no riot police officers around at the moment. They are further down the road dealing with somebody just attacked our camera.
The following morning, TV screens were full of depressing images of burnt-out buildings and a dead bus.
But it was far from over.
Over the next few days, trouble broke out in other areas, and alongside the window smashing came more and more footage of looting.
The violence and hysteria seemed to be spreading in an almost viral manner, again, just like in a zombie film. In fact, at times, things looked more like a zombie film than most zombie films. The unreal apocalyptic feel carried through into the endless helicopter coverage, which was starting to resemble the most depressing Command and Conquer level ever designed. Even from this vulture's perspective, the brazen lack of respect some of the rioters were showing the police was startling to watch live. In fact, it wasn't just violent, it was downright cheeky. That incident actually led to one of the most bizarre identity parades in British criminal history.
Just take your time. Anything look familiar?
Maybe number 3?
Number 3.
As time wore on, the trouble spread even further. It was as if some kind of lawlessness gas had been released. Disturbing footage showed Croydon was now twinned with the Eye of Sauron, while in Clapham Junction, Sky reporter Mark Stone was busy capturing unprecedented scenes of pixelated anarchy on his smartphone.
Mind you, you've got to hand it to whoever fitted that bracket to the wall. They did a heck of a job.
He also held impromptu interviews with alleged looters with their faces covered.
These are a couple of people who appear to have been at it. What's all... No, I live here. I'm just astounded at what you're doing.
Well, we're getting our taxis back.
You're getting your taxis back.
Well, fair enough. They probably will need taxis back, considering how much stuff they're carrying. Trouble was, much of the live coverage depicted shops being looted, with no one apparently coming to stop it. It was almost like a commercial advertising the ultimate giveaway sale.
Kicking off now, it's Britain's most terrifying sale. Yes, it's August Monday Madness. Thousands of prices and windows smashed. Get your hands on top-name brands or anything else that's lying around. Plasma screens were £750, now no pounds. Trainers were £79, now no pounds. Basmati rice was £8.99, now no 99. First come, first served. If you can get it off the wall, it's yours. Get this TV now and receive an increased sentence absolutely free. Branches in Hackney, Ealing, Croydon, Clapham Junction, and coming soon to Manchester. See Rolling News for details. Must end soon. Please, God, let it end soon. Aside from the violence, one of the most depressing aspects was the nature of the looting. It all seemed to be about getting your hands on phones and tellies and trainers. What's so great about trainers anyway? You stick them on your feet and walk around for a while till they go out of fashion. Woo-hoo! If we've really become a species that's impressed by footwear, we might as well give up and go home.
Having thoroughly depressed us all with scenes of unprecedented urban destruction, the news now needed to give us something to cling to, and so it began to highlight some of the more cheery side effects of the riots. So there was widespread coverage of the heartening impromptu broom armies that assembled in London to clean up the mess. Yeah, that may look uplifting, but somewhere there's a broom showroom that's been gutted. There was even a breakout viral star in the form of Pauline Pierce, the woman captured ranting at looters on YouTube.
She's working hard to make her business work, and then you lot want to go and burn it up for what? Just to say that you're warring and you're bad man.
She was the Susan Boyle of the riots, except instead of singing I Dreamed a Dream, she was standing in front of a piece of graffiti that said, Cameroon suck my dick, bellowing abuse.
You lot piss me the fuck off! I'm ashamed to be a happy person!
So more like the Sex Pistols, really.
Got your teeth or not?
Not that these punk roots stopped her from appearing on Cheerful This Morning to the delight of Eamon Holmes and being profiled like a pop star on the news. But what would really make people feel better was seeing the wrongdoers banged up.
Many of them seemed to be revelling in their crime spree, posing for snaps with their haul like triumphant winners of a gadget show competition.
Sky News carried an illuminating interview with a group of self-confessed looters in disguise.
In disguise to protect their identities. 2 were dressed as ninjas, 1 disguised as a man peering out from an elephant's arsehole.
But never mind that, let's hear what they have to say.
And what did you get then?
Oh, what did I get? Tracksuits, couple electronic stuff.
Nice green scarf.
I know people that know people, so I got a van.
You had a van? So you were going around in a van, filling it up in different locations from different stores?
Yeah, but we also dropped it off.
Bit like a cardo, really.
Any bad feelings at all? Have you ever thought about it at night when you've been sleeping in your bed?
No, because I'm watching my plasma that I just got. Feels like Christmas came early.
And with that, this troubled band of teenagers walked off into the sunset with their trousers falling down.
Should have nicked her belt.
Over the following weeks, the media went into a full-blown hand-wringing exercise trying to work out why the giddy heck the riots had happened.
Thing is, it seemed to me the riots actually just hardened whatever opinion you'd had beforehand. Masked youths blamed anger and anger.
So what do you think drove the people that smashed this place up last night? What was in their minds?
Just anger, innit? Anger as well.
Grown men blamed the big society.
It's big society. It's a load of crap, what we say. The big society is not worth 10 bob.
On civilised Sky News, posh people blamed people from the estates.
I think it's just people from local estates.
And arseholes on horrible US shitcasts blamed immigrants.
Many of them are immigrants. Many of them can't speak the language. Of course they're going to be unemployed.
In an unusually angry news night, which had even had its windows kicked out, David Starkey seemed to join in, blaming race.
The whites have become black, a particular sort of violent, destructive, nihilistic gangster culture has become the fashion.
Yeah, black people, it's all your fault, even when you're trying to fool us by not being black. I mean, look at this white black bastard. How dare he? White as the ace of spades. Boo! Go back to Africa or Surrey.
I was in London for the big riots. I was amazed anything over here could burn. In this damp, stone, brick, ugly, mossy rock. I'm amazed I can keep a cigarette lit outside. And I don't know why it happened. The riots happened for whatever reason they happened. They're trying to say it's a socio-economic thing, and maybe it is. I don't think so. Unless you had some kind of flat screens for the needy program that got chiseled out of the budgets. Take your little rioter at home and put him on your lap and explain to him. Go ahead, loot and riot and steal every flat screen out of that shop, you little hoodlum, you little chimney sweep, you little scamp. Fill your entire walls with flat screens everywhere you look, and all that's on is Friends and Top Gear. And with the hours you keep, you're gonna get the episode with the deaf interpreter flailing away in a seizure in the bottom of your screen so you can't even pay attention to him. I've literally wet a napkin and stuck it to the lower quarter of my television screen so I could get through an episode of a show I didn't want to watch anyway. What you have to explain to your youth is their outlook is bleak regardless. It doesn't matter if you have money over here. You're in the United Kingdom. Your outlook is fucked.
The killing, that was good, right? But it was really weird.
It was about Sue Perkins, except instead of, like, judging a baking contest, she's being a policeman, except not a man, but a woman with a jumper on. The same jumper for weeks, so she would have stunk. And there wasn't much killing in it, unless you count a girl who got murdered at the start. And the parents took ages to get over it. Usually in crime things, you see the relatives for, like, one scene, you know, boo-hoo. But in this, it kept showing them again and again, sitting around, looking upset and crying and getting angry and crying again and looking lost until you're like, all right, the murder was like 9 whole episodes ago. Get over it. Have some ice cream or something. Jesus. You've got 2 other kids. Take them to the zoo and try not to get them killed, you selfish bastards. Then it was so popular, they did it again. The Killing 2, right? That was like The Killing 1, but with Sarah Lund in a different jumper. And it had giant haystacks in it, and this man who ran around hiding everywhere in the army, and the army blokes were a bit weird and sometimes offered to toss each other off.
Det har været nogle hårde dage. Jeg kan godt tage over, hvis du vil. Det bliver ikke nødvendigt. Ellers tak.
Didn't really get it.
September is the month for authenticity, and there were red faces all round as the first episode of hard-hitting new ITV documentary Strand Exposure inadvertently included footage from a video game, thinking it was a real IRA home movie.
With Gaddafi's heavy machine guns, it was possible to shoot down a helicopter, as the terrorists' own footage of 1988 shows. This was what the security forces feared most.
Despite that embarrassing mistake, it really was the most eye-opening documentary I've seen since that panorama about the big monkey lobbing barrels at a plumber.
Sticking with games, it was a bumpy year with titles like the sumptuous and epic Skyrim and groundbreaking detective em-up L.A. Noire, a cinematic homage to film noir jam-packed with hot man-on-corpse action, faintly eerie cameos from the cast of Mad Men.
You and Ryan are fifth columnists.
And how do you figure that, wise guy?
And plentiful sequences in which you quizzed creepily realistic suspects.
You want a confession? That's what you want?
That's exactly what we want. Where were you on the night of the Super Mario Land?
It was also a good year for fans of repeatedly shooting people in the face as 2 of the biggest video game franchises went to war with each other, the gung-ho Modern Warfare 3 versus the equally gung-ho Battlefield 3.
They look macho as heck, these things, but really they're powerfully homoerotic. I mean, check out this guy's moustache.
You spend loads of time crawling behind him with his bum right in your face. It even says the word follow over his head like a direction straight from your heart.
Although, sometimes the action seems unnecessarily cruel. I mean, the guy in front is meant to be my pal, but watch him deal with this guard. See, I just don't want to be friends with someone who can do that and shrug it off.
Entertainment, and in a noble bid to repeal Britain's grubby something-for-nothing culture, ITV broadcast overblown Cowell-devised guessing game Red or Black.
It was basically a massive coin toss, but without the coin, so just a massive toss.
Since the show was all about evenly matched odds, it was presented by tragic conjoined twins Ant and Dec, and livened up by cameos from the likes of Louis Walsh, seen here forcefully plunging away in a bid to blast David Hasselhoff's arse off. Eventually, the contestants were whittled down until in the tantalising finale, winner Nathan Thingamy Fists emerged victorious. And since contestant backstory is everything on a show like this, it was fortunate the first winner had such a good one, because it turned out he'd served 5 years in prison for beating up an ex-girlfriend.
Nathan, I've been dying to say this.
You know, if I was him and I'd won £1 million, I'd spend it on covering up my past.
Throughout the year, things had been somewhat hairy down Gaddafi way. A sort of world leader supergroup had launched Operation Odyssey Dawn, a prog-rock military campaign supporting the Libyan rebels.
Interesting fact, Berlusconi only took part because he thought it was a plan to invade Libya.
Now, with NATO assistance, the Libyan rebels played a sort of tug-of-war with Gaddafi's forces along a 1,000-mile stretch between Tripoli and Benghazi.
What this meant was that despite hours of nail-biting footage of reporters dodging bullets...
They were rebel vehicles.
For the average viewer, it all got a bit confusing. I mean, I know I'm broadly meant to be on the side of the rebels, but in terms of narrative, this is all over the place. It's all map this and map that, different flags, different place names. I mean, keep it simple, for God's sake. And the amount of ammo they're getting to is just mental. I wouldn't be surprised if they caused a global lead shortage.
Look, the news just showed them shooting everything. It was bloody chaos.
They even seem to have declared war on the sky. Seriously, the average lifespan of a Libyan sparrow must have plummeted to about 15 seconds.
It was fun for the onlookers, though, who could be seen taking photos of everything like they were at Alton Towers. Eventually, in September, the rebels made a final advance into Tripoli, and Sky News' Alex Crawford, who'd got a heck of a scoop broadcasting live from the back of a rebel vehicle, was first on the scene as Gaddafi's compound was overrun.
She even conducted a fun interview with a guy who'd swiped Gaddafi's hat and some of the bling from his bedroom.
I was like, oh my God, I'm in Gaddafi's room. Oh my God.
But even as Gaddafi's compound was being turned into a sort of adventure playground and people dissed his image in the streets, there was no sign of Gaddafi himself. And as September became October, it looked like he might never be seen again, until he was.
Yes, when his convoy was intercepted, Gaddafi sought shelter in a tunnel under the road and might not have been caught if only he hadn't started bloody tweeting about it. What happened next was one of the most nightmarish images of the year, and things only got worse.
We show these pictures with a warning that the video contains images of Gaddafi's dead, bloodied body from the start. The pictures are graphic and may be distressing to watch.
Oh, come on, how bad can it be?
So this is how it ended. The body of Muammar Gaddafi lying in a freezer.
There was no respite down the newsagents the following day. It's odd that newspapers won't print nipples on the front cover, but a triumphant photo of a dead man, that's okay. So many people wanted to have a Facebook snap of Gaddafi's body, it was kept in cold storage till it started to go off.
Still, let's not judge. If he died in Britain, they'd have put him on a slab in the middle of the Westfield shopping centre.
We used to believe if someone took your photo with a camera, it would steal part of your soul. Watch the news today and it looks like the people taking the photos are the ones who've had part of their souls stolen.
Now, along with urban violence and unbridled despair, Twitter hashtags were all the rage this year. Here's BAFTA-winning human being and comedian Brian Limmy Limond with a thing about them.
Welcome to Question Time.
Ah, Question Time, my favourite programme. An hour of intense political discourse. But wait, what's this? I can tweet along using the hashtag BBCQT. That's a great idea. Join the debate. Let's see what people are saying. Oh my God, that Theresa May is wearing her spacesuit coat again. She looks like a fucking astronaut. She does as well, she does. Reply, she does as well, she does. Oh, but now I'm missing this. Rewind. She does as well, she does. Play. Ah, Afghanistan, good question. In fact, she looks like him from that comic who has the jumper up to his nose. Oh, I have to tweet that, but who is that again? I know, I'll look it up. Pause. Who was that? Who the fuck was that? Oh, forget it. I'm miles behind now. Like, okay, Afghanistan, play. Bendy Bananas. Oh, I see, it's that idiot Farage going on about bendy bananas again. He'll turn into a banana at this rate. Oh, that's good. He'll turn into a banana at this rate. Send. But now everyone's talking about the massacre. And I'm talking about bananas. Okay, I think I'll just catch up.
Good night.
And that's it finished. Great idea.
Not everything was awful in 2011. There was some good stuff on the telly.
To pick some examples at random, there was the stylish vintage drama The Hour, a saga of impassioned reporters in 50s Beebland starring Ben Whishaw, Romola Garai and Fred West, who also popped up in harrowing bleak-em-up appropriate adult.
It's basically a story about the world's nastiest hobbit.
8 killings. 8. All right, 9.
Oh, Fred.
There was also eye-opening multi-camera teach-em-up educating Essex and shocking melancholy with Nostalgia Fest This Is England 88.
And of course, there was that bakery thing.
There was a show, right, which was like MasterChef, but only with baking. The Great British Bake Off, just baking. It was good, but sort of particular, you know? Like living in a future where only bacon is allowed. You weren't allowed to fry anything. There wasn't any frying. Frying was against the rules. If you tried to fry something, they'd probably just take you around the back and, like, shoot you, like, bang, in the back of the head.
On your marks, get set, bake.
There was all this jeopardy, you know, like, will the pastry be too tough or too flaky? Or will they forget to use pastry? Anything could happen. They might, like, knock over a pan or go mad and fuck the oven. it all had this great footage of like things coming out of ovens and people looking at them and eating them and squirrels bollocks and pies and cakes and everything. It was class. I think if you won, you got the chance to run a Greggs or something.
By the time November hauled its carcass over the horizon, we'd all had just about enough of 2011. But hey, maybe things would cheer up, and hey, maybe they wouldn't. The global economy was lurching along like a dying dog with a harpoon in its guts, and howls of protest were growing. And little wonder people were so flippin' angry when confronted by scenes like this one on BBC News as a slick hobby trader appeared to blurt out a few uncomfortable home truths.
This is not a time right now to wishful thinking the government is going to sort things out. The governments don't rule the world. Goldman Sachs rules the world.
Fortunately, that guy's just some clown. I mean, if you look at the professionals who actually run the stock exchange, you'll see they know precisely what they're doing. Oh, Jesus Christ.
The Smurfs opening the stock exchange this morning.
Surreal coverage like this only added to the sense of catastrophe.
It was the most boring apocalypse ever, Numbergeddon.
Doesn't help that the numbers involved are always either too massive to understand or too small.
The European Central Bank has raised its key interest rate by 0.25% to 1.25%.
Because digits are dull, the news had to use dramatic language to convey a sense of terror.
Billions more wiped off the markets. In the week, the world stared into the abyss of recession again.
The economy was continually on the brink, or gazing into the abyss, or teetering on the precipice, or gawping over the brink of both the abyss and the precipice into a bottomless pit full of decaying banknotes being pecked at by vultures with coins for eyes. There was one financial train wreck after another. We had Ireland, we had Portugal, and of course, we had Greece.
Greece was the Enron of Europe, and things there looked awful. Brilliant from a TV news perspective because it turned a dry economic story into something with panic and fire in it.
To be fair, Greece does catch fire easily. Just ask anyone who's made chips.
Next, it was time to worry about Italy, which had a liquidity problem, possibly because it was headed by a leader who'd spent years doing his level best to spurt all the liquid out of his body. But now he was in a hole he hadn't cheerfully lubricated first.
Silvio Berlusconi resigns as Italy's Prime Minister.
Yes, while throughout the Arab world leaders were being ousted by the people, in Europe they were being ousted by cold, hard numbers. And the financial buggeration keeps on the buggering. The rate things are going, we're going to end up having to adopt a medieval bartering system where you trade sexual favours for food. Sainsbury's is going to be grim on a Saturday morning, everyone standing around the checkout, tearfully masturbating for a carton of fruit drink. Still, Berlusconi would be in his element, I suppose. I doubt it's the first time he's tossed off over an innocent smoothie. Anyway, health, and a frank edition of This Morning highlights the importance of prostate exams by asking Dr. Chris Steele to examine a famous anus. Mr. Paul Ross looked remarkably relaxed as Dr. Chris lubed up and gave him the finger, while Philip Schofield, who didn't know where to look but knew exactly where not to look, stood rigidly still wearing the terse expression of a man witnessing Britain's most unconventional new puppet show.
Just sliding my finger in. I'm into the rectum now, feeling the back of his prostate gland, which is smooth, it's not enlarged.
Give you a tenner if you flick one of his kidneys from the inside.
You have to go quite deep. I'm sorry about this, Paul.
Sniggering aside, this eye-catching stunt did much to raise awareness of the serious issue of stinky winky finger bum.
There was this thing with Hugh Grant and Alan Partridge they kept showing, but I didn't really get it. It didn't even have a theme tune, and it was all set in this one room where they just moaned about newspapers for hours. Rubbish.
December means one thing, Christmas! And the Christmas adverts had already been on for about 6 weeks.
In a commercial twice as depressing as the average Deck famine appeal, Littlewoods destroyed the Santa myth for good with this horrible musical in which a choir of kiddywinks revealed who really doles out the presents.
Who put an Xbox under the tree? Who got a fidget just for me? And who put a laptop on Grandpa's knee? My mother.
Sounds like Mum was pretty active during the looting.
Meanwhile, in this alarming sales pitch, Lord Frederick Flintoff builds a supermarket in a town square.
Which he reckons will be so great, it'll make people come.
If you build it, people will come.
Really?
They'll come because they want Christmas to be special.
Well, I suppose it would make Christmas special.
They'll come for the fresh British turkey.
And the British beef.
Oh, that's disgusting.
They'll come for the Stilton. They'll come for the panettone.
Doesn't take much to make these fuckers come, does it?
They'll come for the game pie.
And the Christmas cake, Freddy.
People will come People must definitely come.
Oh, whatever. As long as they don't come on the food. Someone's got to eat that, you know.
I'll do the jokes.
Speaking of expelling liquid, this melancholic tale of a young boy waiting to give his parents a gift reduced millions to tears.
This made people cry. That's what we've become, a species that cries at adverts for shops, literally weeping IQ points out of our bodies. Worse still, it's a dog's head in that box. He killed it in July. He's been waiting to give it to them all this time. You know, something about this ending reminds me of the ghastly end of the Hammer House of Horror episode, The House That Bled to Death. I wish that was happening.
Where the hell did you get that?
Hooray for Christmas! Well, that's it for 2011. Happy New Year! Unless you're watching this on the iPlayer, in which case, why weren't you watching when this was shown on the proper television? What are you? It's not a video game. This is your life. Go away.
There's more comedy tomorrow with a taste of the Edinburgh Festival at 10. And coming up next, it's Lemmy the Movie here on BBC4 in just a couple of minutes.